Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is Thursday, March 19th, 2020, and you have reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig a little bit deeper, and we've got a very special show for you this evening. As the calendar changes to the 2020s, it's time to look back at the previous decade, and tonight we're going to talk about the best films of the 2010s, the whole decade, a once-in-a-decade kind of a show. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts here this evening. I'm actually in Astoria, New York. As fans of the show know, I go back and forth to New York and LA depending on work, and I'm in New York for a little bit, pretty much the entire month of March. But I am representing LA. I've got my Ducks hat on for this very special show, the Anaheim Ducks, because I think for me personally, the 2010s represented me starting my life in Los Angeles. I moved in January 2010 to Los Angeles, and I've got the Clippers also over here over my right shoulder. So 2010s for me was about building a life in Los Angeles. So I thought I would represent that with my hat and the background a little bit. Now, ladies and gentlemen, my co-host for this very special show with me, first, a former superhero now trying to be taken seriously as a below-the-liner, Alex Evans is here.
Hello, everyone.
And a CIA operative tasked from rescuing the audience from Alex and my controversial film choices on his last show of the society ever, George Pappas is here.
Hi, everybody. Don't reveal my CIA history,
though. Sorry about that. So, guys, I'm a little nervous. I don't know about you guys. It might be the biggest show we've ever done. Like the best of the decade. Like we've never done that before. And because I'm nervous, I'm going to have Yingling here. It was the cheapest beer at the grocery store. I can't get the cap off. Is anybody drinking with me?
No. Yeah, I'm having Clontarf whiskey with Diet Coke because I have nothing else to mix it with.
All right.
I do not like Diet Coke.
But you such about the special experience. Well, cheers to you, sir.
Cool.
And so real quick, guys, just some other little tidbits from the best of the decade, if you will. The highest rated TV show of the decade was actually American Idol, mainly due to numbers it achieved in 2010 and 2011. Huge numbers, dominating television by a large margin. The scripted leader of the decade was NCIS, the top scripted program in 8 of the 10 years of the decade. As far as comedy is concerned, The Big Bang Theory led all comedies on network television. The number one song of the decade, according to Billboard, is Uptown Funk by Mark Ronson featuring Bruno Mars. Also won some Grammys, as I recall. And the best-selling album of the decade was 21 by Adele. Does anyone want to guess the best-selling book of the decade? You might be able to figure it out.
A Song of Ice and Fire?
No. Made into a movie early in 2014, I think the movie was, maybe a little less. 50 Shades of Grey was the best-selling book of the decade.
I'm assuming that's your number one film today.
Shh, don't give it away. All right, guys, anything on that? And the tops of the decade? I just wanted to go burn through that really quickly. Anything you'd like to add to that? TV, music, books?
Those are all pieces of content that I did not ingest and have no real opinion on.
Me either, actually. Come to think of it, I mean, I may have caught American Idol in passing if I was like visiting somebody's house or something like that.
Hopefully they brought joy to a lot of people. I wasn't one of them, but fair enough.
As always with top tens, I took, there's no way I'm going to get these right. I have a better chance of getting George right, but I took a guess as to what these guys' number one films of the decade are going to be, and we'll see how I do. I don't feel good about these guesses, but there's a lot more to choose from when it comes to best of the decade, and I didn't even know George that well, either of them that well at the beginning of the decade. So it'll be really interesting to see how that all plays out. All right. So we got the flashcards. The next question that I always ask at every top 10, and this is a bigger question, these guys might not have an answer for this, is what is the biggest movie miss the one movie that in the decade that you wish you'd seen that you did not get a chance to see for nights? There's no way to see it all. There's 300 movies per year, so we're looking at like potentially 3,000 movies to think about here, more than that, probably closer to 3,500. So out of that, was there one that you wish you could have seen that you didn't? Anybody? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I don't feel like I know what I didn't see enough.
Fair enough. George, is there a film that comes to mind?
I can't say that there's anything that I'm like angry at myself for not seeing or anything like that, because I do tend to see whatever I want to see. But there was a movie, Capernaum?
It was 2018, I think. Capernaum.
Capernaum, yes. That I would like to have seen. I heard it was really excellent. And
I have not seen Capernaum either. But the film that stuck out to me is a film that I wasn't interested in seeing initially, but I became interested after seeing more of the director's work. It's a film called Warrior. Alex and I both talked about the film Miracle on the last Sound Off from director Gavin O'Connor, and he also directed Warrior.
I enjoyed Warrior and watched it several times at sea with my crew in Antarctica.
All right, there you go. Alex liked it, but I missed it. And I'm not generally interested in fighting per se, but like I said, I enjoyed the director's work. Nick Nolte got a Best Supporting Actor Oscar nomination for Warrior.
I didn't see it either. Now,
the usual top 10 disclaimers, and if you watch the show, you know I'm pretty weird. I'm a weird guy. I tend to love films that don't get very much attention from others, but I don't feel like I want to cite films in these top 10s that I don't enjoy as much just because conventional wisdom or other critics suggest that I should. And so as you might expect, I have 0 Best Picture winners in my top 10 and only 2 films in my top 10 that even got Best Picture nominations. I would say, however, that I did not stay true to top 10 lists that I've revealed on this show. I went back and made a short list of 23 films I was considering for this top 10, and I couldn't really decide. That's how close it all was. I don't know if you guys had similar issues, but with this greater pool, I feel like I really struggled at first because everything seemed so good to me. So I rewatched 12 of them that I hadn't seen in a while, which was a pleasure. Terrific project. They're all great films, so it was great to revisit some of the best art of the decade, and that really helped me sort it out. Like they started to separate themselves just upon rewatching. But I found that there were some films that I'd previously named number 1 of a previous year on this show that I no longer considered number 1 in that year. So I reevaluated some of my lists, not by much, but by a little. And the film that I assumed was going to be number 1 of my decade, the preseason favorite, if you will, actually didn't even make the top 10, falling all the way to number 18 of the decade. So I think it's interesting because I think some films maybe last better than others. And perhaps to some degree, I'm changing and evolving as a film viewer. And out of the 5 number 1 films I've announced on this show so far, only 2 of them made this list. And in 2 cases, I no longer consider them the best in their respective years. So it's really important to watch some of these other films. Do you guys have any sort of overarching comments about your top 10, like disclaimers that you want to give before we get into it?
Well, my top 10 isn't entirely, this is my favorite of the decade. I just looked over the movies of the decade and thought of the ones that had the biggest impact on me. I didn't get to watch them over. I am certain that I would feel differently about certain movies that I saw. Sometimes a movie just on 1 second viewing doesn't do for you what it did the first time. It's amazing how some things just seem richer the more you see them, and others, not that they're bad, but whatever experience you can get out of them, you've had. So
I feel like there were films that I was looking at that I really enjoy that might not even make my top 100 of the decade, but I still like them a lot. That's how many good films I think there were. Alex, anything about your top 10 that you want to disclaim before we get into it?
I kind of approached this as I made a list of every film I saw every year, and then I pared it down. A lot of working in Excel to make this more so than rewatching a lot of these. As you might expect from me, it's pretty heavily period films.
Since there's so many films to choose from, such bigger pool than we normally have in top 10s, and given how different we are as us 3 specifically, how different we are as reviewers and people, I doubt there's usually some crossover in the top 10s for every year, but I doubt there's going to be any crossover tonight. For me, on my list, 7 of the 10 years of the decade are represented, but no individual year more than twice. Not by design, it just sort of happened that way. Kind of amazingly, one director not only made my top 25 of the decade twice, both of those films are on my top 10. So this particular director made 3 films in the decade, one of which won the Oscar for Best Picture, but it's the 2 other films that he made that made my top 10 of the decade. 3 films on the top 10 have been indie spotlights on this very show, including 2 that we did in the very first season of the show. Only 4 films on my top 10 list tonight made my top 10 list that I've done on the show. 2 number 1s and 2 number 2s have made it way to the top 10 list tonight. All right. You guys ready?
I am.
Number 10, and I will let George go first. What is your number 10?
Well, I'm going to start with my movie from 2010, which was an Academy Award nominated film that did not win. But it was my favorite of that year, even though I also liked the one that won very much. It's The Social Network, written by Aaron Sorkin and directed by David Fincher. If there's anything about David Fincher that I had any reservations about before this film, it's only that he seemed to like to hit us with a surprise ending. Knowing that one was coming in some of his films tended to take away some of the power of them. In this one, though, the surprise ending is what happened after the story he was told continued to go on in our lives and Facebook took over the universe. I loved the film. I thought it was Sorkin's best writing, some of Fincher's best work. Great introduction for me to Andrew Garfield, who I think has been one of the best actors of the decade.
I do like the film. It's one that I didn't love. And I've got 2 David Fincher films ranked ahead of it in the decade. But I did like it. It's a good movie. There's a certain coldness to it that I thought actually was intentional, but I didn't enjoy. It's a minor quibble, but it's a good film and a very good film. Alex, anything on Social Network?
I found it to be an interesting film. I think the way that David Fincher works is not really safe or respectful to his crews, just doing 100 takes of things. That's a failure of communication. If you can't ask your actor for what you need in less than that, then I don't think you're very good at your job. Probably an unpopular opinion.
Well, I mean, I think he also likes to try different things. I don't think it's necessarily acting, like I think he gets it one way and then he and the actor collaborate on another idea, within that same thing. So, I can see both sides of that coin. It's not always the actor, he does a lot of camera movement. That takes a lot of time.
If I was the gapper on that movie, I would have been so
for sure.
with him.
But also, he's also a guy that shoots rehearsals because he can. So, the first 9 or 10 takes potentially of something that he does, them just finding it. You shoot the rehearsals. I'm a big believer in that as well, because maybe it's magic. Like maybe you find something in the spontaneity of that works really well. So, and also it gives you something to look back at. And, everybody can look at, all right, that's where the camera missed his mark and that sort of thing. So I can see both sides of that.
I do think the technical innovation on the film, did a lot for our field in that they had, the carbon fiber body reds used for the crew shell sequences that he, I believe, borrowed from Soderbergh or another filmmaker. It really was one of those crossover films that cemented, the digital transition from film for filmmaking. Anything
you need to rebut or add? Yeah, I mean, I think we all agree it's a good film, and you liked it a lot more than we did, and that's okay. But I can't say it's a film I didn't like or was bad. And I expected somebody to bring it up tonight. I guess I should have predicted it was you. Alex, you're number 10.
My number 10 is a film called Red Tails, produced by George Lucas. It's his first major production after Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. This film took lessons from Star Wars and used them to tell the story of the Tuskegee Airmen in World War II. The digital workflow of the time, I felt, took me a little bit out of the period because it's very clean, digital-looking stuff, a lot like the camera work in Revenge of the Sith. And we're kind of used to, grain, even on film shot digitally. They add grain in post now. I thought brilliant locations were picked around Italy for it. Production design, the costuming, and memorable performance brought a heroic story to life in a very compelling way. And this is a film that gave refreshing representation to a major production without hand-fisting it through inorganic characters and plot devices. It was rooted in history and showcased it with sincerity. Cinematographer John B. Aronson with editors Ben Burt and Michael Halloran knocked this one out of the park, pushing technology ahead for just filmmakers in general.
This will go quick because I didn't see Red Tails. I had forgotten even about it. George, have you seen Red Tails?
No.
All right. We just have to take your word for it. Maybe that's a second run for me later on.
One of the things is you think about all the dogfight sequences that George Lucas did through the Star Wars films, that this is actual dogfights, kind of like what Howard Hughes was trying to shoot and stuff. I think it's one of the best aerial combat films ever made.
Ever made? Wow. That's a big statement there. All right.
There aren't a lot.
There's enough. First Best Picture winner has some pretty amazing scenes for 1928. Wings has some great flying action scenes. All right. An early surprise, at least for me. All right. My number 10, ladies and gentlemen. On my 5 top 10 lists on the show, I've named 3 documentaries. Listen to Me, Marlon in 2015, Apollo 11 this past year, 2019, and this film. Therefore, I hereby name this the best documentary of the decade from 2018, Minding the Gap, which was my number 2 film on the top 10 that year. It's inspiring how one friend tries to document the lives of his buddies and winds up almost unknowingly painting a picture of life in modern-day America, especially as it pertains to the lost youth of the country. In doing so, it gives us insight into domestic abuse, substance abuse, racism, and classism, an ultra-relevant work of art. The film is raw, but that's almost part of its charm. There's so much heart and depth and commentary. Part of the joy is that I'm not sure that that's what the director set out to do. It's almost like a very happy accident. If I have any minor criticism, it's that the end gets a little overly sentimental, as if towards the end of the edit, they realized that they had something special to sort of burst that bubble of lack of self-awareness. It's a disappointing end, but it doesn't take away from the first 90 minutes, which I think is actually life-changing. Now, George, you were on that top 10 with me when I named it number 2 film in 2018. I don't suppose you've seen the film since then.
No, I'm sorry, I haven't.
No worries. It was a long shot. but clearly my vote for it didn't make you interested in seeing it enough.
That I mean,
I'm teasing you, George.
All right.
Alex, documentary Minding the Gap.
I have not seen it.
All right. Moving right along. We haven't seen each other's movies for the most part. That'll keep things moving very, very quickly. All right, it's time to move on then to number 9. His number 10 was Red Tails. Alex, what have you got for your number 9?
It's another 2012 film called Lawless. Lawless tells the story of an impoverished Appalachian community during the authoritarian era of Prohibition, by telling the story of a family of moonshiners as portrayed by Tom Hardy, Shia LaBeouf, and Jason Clarke. The desaturated cinematography, vibrant score, and symphonic editing made this bootlegger epic come to life in a memorable and exciting way.
Cool. I don't know if you know about, there's a drive-in theater at the City of Industry that does double features for $7. Are you familiar with that, Alex?
I'm not.
And that's where I saw Lawless, and a double feature with Dax Shepard's film Hit and Run. And the bad thing, incidentally, about drive-in theaters is you have to keep your car on the whole time and everybody's battery dies. The downside of a double feature at a drive-in. I did not hate Lawless. I liked it. I remember liking it. It didn't make my top 10 that year, and I would say it didn't necessarily stood out to me as good, but didn't stand out to me as great. But again, it's not a film that I disliked. I thought it was interesting, but I didn't think there was anything particularly special about the filmmaking or anything that made it stick with me. I do like Shia LaBeouf, though, as you know. George, did you see Lawless?
No.
Yeah, I mean, it was in and out of theaters. I mean, like, it was at the drive-in so early because drive-ins there are like second run.
I saw it at the historic Vista Theater, which is built out of set pieces from a D.W. Griffith production.
That's right near where you and I both live. So, George, it is time for your number 9.
Okay, this is milder fare than I would usually include on a 10 best list of any kind, but it just really resonated with me, and I like it just as much today as I liked it then, or I hope I would if I were to see it again. It's 50-50, written by Will Reiser, directed by Jonathan Levine. It's a very good-humored look at the life of a seemingly happy and successful young man who discovers that he has a rare spinal cancer and is going to require a very specific surgery and treatment. It's a movie that handles all of this with an unfailing humor that doesn't ever minimize the severity of what is going on either. I just was completely caught up in it, and its quiet charms, having that kind of experience with any movie, I appreciate a lot more than the bells and whistles, as they say. This is one that I have nothing but fond feelings for. So I'm happy to put it on my top 10, even though I bet no one else in the United States would.
I made my top 10 of 2011 for sure. At the time, it was my number 3. I've since reevaluated the list, and it's down to number 5. We actually did a review, an Indie Spotlight on 50-50, episode 38.2. Not to rehash it, but I'll summarize. I mean, I love the film, actually. I refer to it as a masterpiece of tone because I think one of the hardest things to do is balance comedy and drama in such an effective way. And I actually said that Jonathan Levine, the director, did it with Wilder-esque precision, meaning Billy Wilder. Billy Wilder was able to pull that off consistently. That's what Levine did to me in 50-50. The performances helped. The gravitas of Joseph Gordon-Levitt with the humor of Seth Rogen was a really effective pairing. It's a terrific film, a great screenplay. I think you referenced the screenplay by Will Reiser. It's a great film, and definitely it would make a top 100 of the decade. It didn't make the top 25 for me, but it's really very, very good. And we did it's funny because Davey and I on the show both liked it. Jay Money hated it a lot of it, but he likes darker things, and I think it was a little too light for him. I loved it very much, and I'm very glad to see that it is on your list. I just loved a few just a little bit more.
I love that term, masterpiece of tone. Isn't
cool. Alex, 50-50?
I absolutely love that film. It was actually shot in Vancouver while I was living there, largely at locations on the same block as my school. Thought the performances were all great, really enjoyed the script, and thought it captured the spirit and tone of the Pacific Northwest in a very accurate and lovable way.
Jonathan Levine reteamed with Seth Rogen this past year with Long Shot, which was actually really good. It didn't quite capture that same tone that 50-50 did. It just missed, but it was still highly enjoyable. The third act had some problems, but Long Shot was pretty good reteaming some of those folks.
That's a movie I've been meaning to see.
I think it was uneven in tone. It had a lot of strengths.
It had moments. It just missed for me. Again, the third act killed it for me. All right, you guys ready to move on?
Yeah.
My number 9. My number 9 was also an Indie Spotlight, like 50-50, but way back on episode 6, before we split up reviews into separate shows, it sparked a long and loving discussion of a film that fascinated us all, me, Davey, and Jay Money at the time. The intense discussion helped me to appreciate the film even more, and it's a film that stuck with me over the years. It's one of 2 foreign films that's going to appear on my top 10 list tonight. And the American remake of this film was released just 6 weeks ago from 2014. And Alex's favorite country of Sweden, my number 9 film, ladies and gentlemen, is Force Majeure, remade here in America as Downhill. The whole ensemble is great. Many of you Game of Thrones fans would learn to love the actor Christopher Hivju from this film, who would go on to become on Giantsbane, the leader of the Free Folk, or he would become the leader of the Free Folk. The film is hilarious in the most uncomfortable way, but it's also a startling investigation into modern-day relationships, family dynamics, crisis management, and also the evolution and perception of masculinity in modern-day society. Director Ruben Östlund manages a beautifully unique tone unlike anything I've ever seen. It finds this balance between almost absurdist humor and supremely insightful existential angst, and it works like gangbusters. It also works in ambiguity, the way that some artists work in oils or clay, or in Alex's case, charcoal. It's a film that you'll be interpreting and dissecting for days, weeks, and maybe even years after, and that to me is extremely worthwhile. Has anybody seen Force Majeure?
Yes, I thought it was excellent. It's a great choice.
Thank you very much, Alex, and from Sweden.
I really enjoyed the film. Christopher Hivju is one of my favorite actors, too.
All right. You guys ready to move on to number 8?
Yes.
All right, here we go. Number 8, going down the top films of the decade. Number 8, George, what do you got?
I think the peace of the night is going to get threatened a little bit here because, JB, I know you do not like this film. My number 8 film, or number 3 film, depending how you look at it, on my list is Django Unchained. I don't know if it's my favorite Tarantino movie, but it's very close. The horrors of the antebellum South are not at all run away from. Tarantino's typical sense of humor and outrageousness manages to allow this story to never not be entertaining and to be a hell of a fun film. I thought it was just terrific.
The good news is I don't feel as strongly about it as I do Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and maybe The Hateful Eight. I feel like I've liked his films decreasingly less as they go on. So I like Django Unchained. Like, I think it's his 7th film, so I think it's my 7th favorite or somewhere along those lines. It was okay. Like, I was intrigued by a lot of things in it, and then it jumped the shark for me, as Tarantino tends to do. Is he goes in different meandering directions sometimes, and not necessarily in ways that I find organic to the characters involved. I don't disagree that it's fun. I just wasn't emotionally invested, and that sort of was a barrier for me. I wouldn't say it's a bad film. Like when you first set it up, I thought I was going to hate it a lot more. I don't hate it that much. I certainly liked Once Upon a Time in Hollywood a lot less. I would say I hated that one. I wouldn't say I hate Django Unchained. I thought it was disappointing because the expectations were so high for me. Alex, Django Unchained.
I significantly enjoyed the film. I always really enjoyed performances by Kerry Washington. Despite me not being a big Leonardo DiCaprio fan, I thought he did a pretty good job in the film, and thought Bob Richardson's cinematography was brilliant in it.
Any rebuttals?
No rebuttals, but I will say that the way you describe feeling about his movies and them jumping the shark in the final act, I think if I were to read about them on paper without seeing them, I would feel the exact same way. I don't know why that isn't the way I react to them, but I really completely go along with them. I feel like he knows what he's doing, and he has such fun doing it that I have fun along with him. I don't know if anyone else could pull off the outrageous last acts that he pulls off. I will say I did not like The Hateful Eight, though. It had moments, but that one really disappointed me.
The Hateful Eight is probably my favorite of his films. And I would say overall, I think he's become a better filmmaker with each film, and I find his early work pretty amateurish.
See, there's something sort of joyous about that, too. Like, yeah, I think he grows in some ways, but I feel like the less he gets unchained, if you will, the more indulgent his films become. And I feel like there was a leanness and meanness to the first 2 or 3 films that I really enjoyed. But that said, I enjoyed both Kill Bills, and they were sort of excessive as well. But that's still more in between before. To your point, George, I do point to Django Unchained as the beginning of the end for my relationship with Quentin Tarantino, because I liked Inglourious Basterds quite a bit. But Django Unchained was the beginning of the end for me, but I didn't hate it. It just got worse and worse with each subsequent movie for me personally.
It's the Marnie of his career.
It's for me personally. Yeah. Alex, you're number 8.
My number 8 is from 2014, the film Fury. Fury is a story of a single tank crew hanging on to survival by any means necessary during the final push towards Berlin at the end of World War II. This film has a heart-pounding intensity. Shia LaBeouf gives a memorable performance in which he actually rips out his own tooth with pliers on camera. The tank battle sequences showcase this kind of warfare in a way that I've not seen in any other period film from around the world doing tank combat. The desaturated, brutalist cinematography creates a world at war without hope or respite that puts you in the tank with desperate men that have lost their humanity as they run over the dead farms of war-torn Europe. I felt showed just the brutality of war in a very honest and stark way. Towards the opening, a soldier being forced to take his first life as an individual and pull the trigger on it, and showing the weight of that decision.
Cool. George, have you seen Fury?
I liked Fury. It's a very good film. I don't think it would have made a 10 best list for me of the year, but it is a movie that I liked very much. Very effective, very atmospheric, very powerful war film, really. I thought all the guys were really excellent in it.
Excellent. Are you guys ready to move on to my number 8, I believe it is?
Yep.
All right. My number 8 is, both of you guys actually have been to my Oscar movie marathons in the past. George, in that one time, and Alex, you've been to several, including just last month. This next film I screened at last year's Oscar movie marathon is the representative from 2013. And in rewatching it that day, in February of 2018, I would have rewatched it. 2019, February 2019. Rewatching it that day, I found I liked it even more than I thought. One film that I thought was going to rank high on this list initially was Catherine Bigelow's Zero Dark 30, which I actually screened at the Oscar Movie Marathon the year before that. Both this film, my number 8, and Zero Dark 30 were thrillers based on very recent history. And while Zero Dark 30 was a riveting and evocative examination of the current geopolitical climate, it was more of a cerebral experience. This film that I have at number 8 managed that aspect of it, but also brought the heart as well. From 2013, I've got Paul Greengrass's Captain Phillips at number 8, one of the 2 Best Picture nominees I mentioned that I have in my top 10. Initially, I had it in number 3 in 2013, in the list films of 2013, but I've since moved it up to number 2 after rewatching it. It's the perfect vehicle for Greengrass's You Are There handheld aesthetic, but through the very real, honest performances from the likes of Tom Hanks and former limousine driver Barkhad Abdi, the film reaches emotional heights as well. Similar to how Greengrass approached his masterpiece from the previous decade, Bloody Sunday, he very effectively shows us both sides of the standoff, the pirates and the victims. And he gives us insight into the pirates and their desperation. We understand them without ever really condoning their behavior or the violence. Captain Phillips is exciting, detailed, fascinating, provocative, informational, and in its own way, touching and loving. I point to a scene at the end where the captain is being evaluated post-rescue, and Tom Hanks plays shock better than I've ever seen it done in a moment that has to rank as one of the best of his career that has so many amazing moments. In many ways, we as an audience are also at that moment getting to release the tension we've kept in while experiencing the traumatic event along with Captain Phillips. To me, ladies and gentlemen, that's great acting and most certainly great filmmaking. Captain Phillips is my number 8, kids.
As someone who's been through a near-death experience at sea, I felt like it captured it and how alone that sensation is. That scene where he's getting rescued, I think that's the best performance of his career.
George, Captain Phillips.
Came this close to being on my list. I think it's a tremendous film. I agree with everything you said about it. Greengrass's direction is just superb. I do think it's one of the best performances Tom Hanks has ever given.
All right, number 7 on our top 10 films of the decade. Whoa. Some great films we're talking about here. This is very exciting. Alex, you first with number 7.
My number 7 is a film from 2018 called Lords of Chaos. Lords of Chaos is the true story of the Norwegian black metal band Mayhem in the 1990s. This film is a story of betrayal, murder, arson, and the intensity and competitiveness that can exist within insular subculture communities. This film is directed by Jonas Åkerlund, mainly known for his music videos for Lady Gaga and other major artists. He played in another band in this scene at the time called Bathory, so he knew all of the characters being portrayed. It was an intimate love letter from a middle-aged man to his teenage friends, showing them the way they were, as if he wished he had a time machine to show them what their mistakes would lead to. The events of this film led to a crackdown on the metal and punk scene in Southeast Asia, which has a big tourism and trade relationship with Scandinavia. Even today, if you are suspected of being a black metal artist in Malaysia and Indonesia, you can be detained without trial and even further shrunken freedom of speech globally. Rory Culkin plays the lead character with total sincerity, showing a conflicted young man filled with anger but hungry for community, whose insecurity escalated this subversive behavior into violence in a way that made his friend circle go off the rails in a truly tragic way. This film reminded me of a lot of my friends within the global metal scene growing up, and just how a few of the wrong circumstances coupled with bad choices made in jealousy can cost a person everything, including their life. This film stuck with me for a week after seeing it in the theater.
I hate to admit it, Alex, but I've never even heard of Lords of Chaos. George, have you heard of it?
No.
I've never even heard of it. And what I think is particularly interesting is you were on the show as of 2018, and I happen to know what you back then anyway. You announced what your 1 and 2 films of 2018 were. So I'm curious if that gives me insight into some other films that might be coming up in your list, or maybe you changed your mind. Don't tell me, but right now I've got some ideas might be coming up on your top 10, the rest of your top 10, because I know there's some other films you mentioned from 2018. So yeah, we got nothing on Lords of Chaos. I'm amazed. I mean, at least I heard of Red Tails, even though I hadn't seen it. But I didn't.
I saw it at the Los Feliz 3 theater.
I do avoid that theater because I feel like it's a little too small. I get a little claustrophobic in it. George, number 7, sir.
I'm in a more commercial vein than either of you. Well, certainly, Alex. My number 7 is Boyhood, written and directed by Richard Linklater, starring Ethan Hawke, Patricia Arquette, and L.R. Coltrane. It was filmed over a 12-year period. It was a very risky venture that I hope doesn't start any kind of trend. It doesn't seem to have done so. But in this particular case, I was utterly caught up in the film. I was especially impressed with Ethan Hawke in this movie. This movie really touched my heart. This story about a boy growing up under difficult circumstances ended up being just as much about his parents growing up under circumstances they couldn't predict. It was a very unique experience. The boy obviously is not the strong actor that the 2 actors who played his parents are. That's kind of a given, and I don't hold it against them. But they know how to work with him. And I think that overall, this is a film that gets to your heart and your soul. And I appreciate it for that experience. And I definitely look back on the past decade of it being one of the highlights of the movies of the past decade.
Certainly the most ambitious film of the decade, or one of them anyway. Unheard of kind of effort there. Certainly the Michael Apted's series of documentaries, I guess, maybe falls into that category. But meaning 7 Up, 14 Up, 21 Up. But I love Boyhood. I really did. In reevaluating the list of 2014, I have it right now at number 5 in my list of 2014 films. So it didn't make my top 25 even. It probably would make a top 50 for sure. I loved it, and I was definitely campaigning for it. Even as the very first episode of this show, that whole show was about Boyhood versus Birdman, that big competition in the 2014 Oscars. And to me, there's no question Boyhood is one I was really rooting for, and it didn't work out.
Yeah.
Alex, Boyhood.
I really enjoyed Boyhood. Other men I know of my generation who grew up in households dealing with divorce or addiction felt really represented and heard and connected with it in a way that would have people that aren't even movie buffs like recommending this like small indie movie to all sorts of people they'd meet after they saw it. Thought Ethan Hawke gave a really brilliant performance in it. I feel like a couple of years on the show we talked about how First Reformed was one of my favorite films the year it came out.
That was 2018. That was one of the ones I was just referring to with the Lords of Chaos.
But yeah, I think he's just a performer that's been getting better and better as his career progresses.
I think I may have mentioned this on that show as well. I saw Ethan Hawke in his high school production of The Glass Menagerie.
I remember you saying that, yeah.
School of Princeton. So I've been following Ethan Hawke's career for longer than any.
The head of my film school at the time directed the film Mystery Date with him.
Oh, yeah.
And when he would teach us directing classes, would frequently refer to that film.
Well, hope you learned something from it.
Sure.
I do love Boyhood. So I think we're good to move on to my number 7, yeah?
We are.
I'm heading back to 2018 for my number 7, and it might stand to reason that it would be the film I named number 1 of that year. Now, George, you were on that top 10. Do you remember what my number 1 film of 2018 was?
Ooh, no, I don't.
Not only was it my number 1, but it was on James's list as well, who did the top 10 with us that year, making it the composite number 1 for the No Name Cinema Society that year. I'm referring to Steve McQueen's Widows. It's a terrific thriller executed with precision and skill and artfulness. It has an outstanding twist that I definitely didn't see coming. Beautiful, gritty cinematography with the boldest and most memorable shot of the year in 2018. Driving around the neighborhood, I recommend checking out that shot. The multiple perspective was actually an asset here instead of a hindrance. The editing team found just the right balance, allowing McQueen to weave a thorough tapestry of that part of Chicago. Top-notch performances all around, including Elizabeth Debicki, whom I named as Best Supporting Actress of that particular year. We understand and feel the motivations of pretty much all the characters, which is quite an achievement and very satisfying, even if we don't root for anybody. We understand their point of view. I think it's a film about duality in a way. No one is completely good and no one is completely bad in Widows. Everyone is to blame, which isn't as dark as it sounds. It just feels human, truly human. And as a result, the film is about so much: racism, classism, feminism, ambition, power, familial dynamics, corruption, and more. probably the most complete movie of 2018. And it's number 7 of the decade for me. George, you had not seen it at the time we did the top 10. Have you since seen Widows?
Audience out there, rewind to the beginning when JB asks us if there's a movie of the past decade we regret not having seen, and change my answer to Widows. There's no excuse, because you're not the only person I know that liked it so much. I don't know why or how I didn't see that.
I don't know either, but as we learned with Minding the Gap, when I make these comments, it doesn't have a lasting impact on you.
Sorry about that. Yikes.
I'm teasing you. Alex, have you seen Widows?
I have not.
Ready to move on, guys?
If you are.
I am. Number 6. Alex, you get to go first.
It's a 2017 film, Death of Stalin.
Actually, it's a 2018 film.
Oh, my mistake. The internet must have lied to me as I was dreaming it.
It was eligible for Academy Awards in 2018.
Yeah.
Probably was released in Britain in 2017.
That's it. Yeah.
Got it. This comedy of errors is a brilliant mashup of historical epic, absurdist ensemble farce. A bitingly brilliant script by director-writer Armando Iannucci tells the story of how the top lieutenants of Comrade Stalin's cabinet reacted to the power vacuum left by his abrupt death after they had been complicit in his crimes, shirking their own sense of responsibility, blaming the culture of fear surrounding the autocrat. Steve Buscemi as Nikita Khrushchev gives a hilarious and heartfelt performance, leading an all-star cast of top comedians from the US and the UK. This film demystifies power and rips down brutal tyrants from their thrones to show them as broken, insecure, petty, rotten scoundrels, devoid of anything beyond circumstance, yielding them the power to abuse and brutalize their own people. Thought it was a brilliant takedown of a truly tragic period of Soviet history.
On the very first sound off of this past year, which I would have aired in like April or maybe early May 2019, when we had like a tweet beat and we talked about Alex's favorite films of 2018. And so the three of us have actually talked about Death of Stalin before on this show. I liked it. I thought it was very charming. Didn't make my top 10. I like the script a lot. I did talk about it as a script that should have been nominated for an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay or Best Adapted Screenplay. I think it was adapted from a short story of some kind. And I think, George, I think you liked it too, as I recall.
Yes, I do think its script was its greatest asset. I especially liked, you can either find it hilarious, you can find it horrifying, depending on the mood you are in and depending on how it hits you. I thought it basically did a good job of allowing all of that to happen. I did think the director had some tone issues. I remember accents being very inconsistent. One of the better movies of its year, maybe not the very best, but it was something that I liked very much and would not shy away from seeing again. There was so much of intelligence on display in that film, and that's ultimately what stands out. It's a very good movie.
Yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit, like I said, but it didn't make the top 10. All right, so that was Alex's number 6. It's time for George's number 6.
Okay, this might be my luscious movie out of my choices. It was released in the United States in 2015. I believe it was released in England in 2014. I don't hear many people talking about it, and I didn't even back then, and I was sorry that it wasn't more popular, because anyone I know who did see it seemed to like it as much as I did. It's called Testament of Youth. It's directed by James Kent. It stars Alicia Vikander. Essentially is about a young woman who is part of a very privileged family in England prior to World War I, but the war changes everything. I thought this was just a wonderful movie, beautiful to look at, beautifully performed, and just a very good and compelling story with a great heroine. My thumbs were entirely up for this. It's one movie I wish had been more of a success.
I'm embarrassed because this is another one I had not even heard of. I did see the film The Aftermath from the same director from 2019 with Keira Knightley. And
I wanted to see that. It looked really good, but people just blew it off so badly.
It was below average, I would say. I have not even heard of Testament of Youth. I was amazed enough when it happened once with Lords of Chaos, but now again. Alex, have you heard of Testament of Youth?
I have not, and I typically enjoy Alicia Vikander's performances, so I'll have to check it out.
She is a very strong actress, but I could also just look at her not do anything for
beautiful
minutes.
She really
Ex Machina was a great commentary on that.
That made my top 10 of 2015. Will not make this list, unfortunately. Or fortunately. All right. So I guess since nobody else has seen it, we're ready to move on, guys, yeah? Mm-hmm. My number 6 is a movie that, first of all, I should say, like my number 7, Widows, my number 6 was film of the decade, was also a composite number 1 for the No Name Cinema Society. for its respective year in 2016, because it was my number 2 film of 2016 and Davey's number 1. I've since moved it to number 1 of that year, and it will be the sole representative of 2016 for me. But I also know that it's a film that Alex hates, making him to refuse to watch future films from this director. Do you want to guess, Alex, what it is?
I don't know.
I'm referring to Martin Scorsese's Silence.
Oh.
I think it's an extraordinary meditation on faith and religion and colonization and freedom, beautifully filmed with an appropriate and inventive mix of close-ups and wide shots, keeping us close to the mind and soul of our protagonist, Padre Rodriguez, while never losing sight of the big picture of the things it was trying to say. It reminded me of my number 1 film of 2019, Ad Astra, in some ways, an existential meditation with a Hearts of Darkness type narrative. The film examines how much of our earthly lives are consumed and dictated by things not of this earth. On one hand, the film cries for freedom of religion, while at the same time questions the very nature of organized religion, separating the concept of religion from the concept of faith. The film suggests that maybe it's not religion itself that's important, but perhaps instead love and compassion and selflessness are the things we could believe in. Many religions suggest that as well, but within a strict set of rules that may themselves be bastardizations of their original intentions. Silence is important to me because it's so extremely ambitious, so wonderfully dense. A lot going on with a wonderful performance at its center. George has already mentioned how Andrew Garfield was one of the best actors of the decade. He was my favorite actor of 2016, though he would be nominated for Hacksaw Ridge instead of this movie. I was particularly impressed in the film by the lack of manipulation that the film seemed to have, shots that weren't overly sentimental, limited score that told us how to feel. Scorsese trusted his audience, and the result to me was transporting. I think it came up when we talked about Last Temptation of Christ, George, in passing, another religious movie from Scorsese, but I can't remember exactly how you felt about it.
There's a reason you can't. I hadn't seen it, and I still haven't. I don't know why. It makes no sense that I would not have seen a Martin Scorsese movie starring 2 actors who I like and one of whom I like very, very much. Actually, I like them both very much. It was one of those things that slipped away from me.
Hold on to your seatbelts, everybody. Alex will have some things to say about this one. And Alex, as I recall, your issues are mainly historical in nature.
Yeah, I think that Jesuit missionaries of that period, specifically in East Asia, were heralds of imperialist oppression because the Vatican's influence had been reduced to being ideological as opposed to being material in terms of its militarism. Men like the characters portrayed in this film are what paved the way for the gunboat diplomacy that seriously harmed the people of Japan in years after this. I would say were influential in leading to the Russo-Japanese War and largely led to the schism that caused American people and the Japanese people to be at war in the 20th century, which culminated in the dropping of 2 nuclear bombs that decimated 2 entire cities. That I think is the most tragic thing that's happened in human history.
It's all Andrew Garfield. I think we should adopt this now. # Andrew Garfield's fault.
I just felt like it was an overly Christian European point of view, and the Japanese point of view felt like furniture.
I disagree with that completely in the sense that I do feel like the film, especially by not being overly manipulative, was condemning colonization and condemning the very thought that the Jesuits felt like it was their responsibility to spread this message, the hubris that it required for them to go there and convert people. And it has several discussions of why are you here? Why can't we just have our own, religion? But without saying the Japanese were right in their persecutions, because I do feel like it looks at both sides of the issue, and it's a very complex issue, and I think that's what's fascinating about it. But I don't think it strictly eschews the Japanese point of view. I think there's several characters, but there's a couple Japanese actors in there that do a great job of presenting that point of view that I think is very compelling. I don't think it was a Judeo-Christian point of view. I think it was a balanced point of view that questioned why religion needed to be forced or spread, but also why religion needed to be persecuted. Why couldn't they just live and let live? Like I said, it's a dense film, so I think it's a lot to capture. So
I also just thought it was really boring.
I'm so interested in the themes, all the themes that you're talking about. Like, I'm so interested in all those things that's what kept me engaged throughout. And I also think it's gorgeous, and Andrew Garfield is pretty spectacular. All right, guys. So I think that's it for Silence. Are we good to move on, guys?
Yeah.
If not, it's fine. I just wanted to. It sounded close to being ready. Okay, so it's time for number 5. These are the best 5 films of the decade, according to us. It's crazy to think about. George, you're up first. Number 5.
You're just going to have to call this our Andrew Garfield special, because my number 5 film co-stars him and Michael Shannon and Laura Dern, and a really wonderful actor in a small role named Tim Guinea, who in a just world, if supporting roles were really considered for supporting actor Oscars, might have been considered, but maybe not, since the film was ignored. But anyway, it is called 99 Homes. It is written and directed by Ramin Bahrani. I just thought it was thought-provoking without ever really hitting you over the head. Even the so-called villain of the piece, who is the real estate person played by Michael Shannon, really does all through the film come off as someone kind of like us, just doing his job and not really letting emotion get in the way of it. I think the film is something that was so applicable to what was going on in our world without ever seeming like something that was preaching to a choir or telling you things you already knew or winking at you with smugness. It really did, for me, put you in the shoes of people whose shoes you might not normally be in and get you to look at a complicated situation in a way you might not have. It was as humanistic as it was political. And I really loved it for that. It was a movie that meant a lot to me. I'm really happy to name it as one of my favorites of the past decade.
So here's the problem. The problem is I know Ramin Bahrani. I'm happy to say this on the internet. I have not come across a bigger douchebag in the industry than Ramin Bahrani.
Oh my.
I had seen his first couple films, Man Push Card and Chop Shop, and was impressed. But then getting to know him as a person, like he is absolutely one of the most condescending jerks I have met in this industry, possibly anywhere, because it's mind-boggling, actually, the things he says to people and the way he treats people. That has nothing to do with whether 99 Homes is a good movie or not, but it explains why after a certain point I'm done with this guy. I will still see Greta Gerwig stuff, obviously, but I am not going to watch more Ramin Bahrani films just as a personal, I don't know what to call it, a boycott, I guess, on my part. And I don't mean to insult your choice, George, or anything like that. I'm just explaining why. Those of us who work in the industry, and Alex has some people that he doesn't like to watch as well. But I don't, even like Greta Gerwig was irritating. She wasn't like downright rude and mean and didn't just treat me, but treated lots of people badly the way that Ramin Bahrani did. And I can, I don't know if people would come on the internet like I am, but I can line up several other people that would back me up on that. Huh. So I'm sorry about that. Alex, have you seen 99 Homes?
I have not, and it doesn't sound like a filmmaker I'd want to see if they're a jerk like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, all these other jerks, or supposed jerks, if they weren't jerks to me, I guess I tend to see their films anyway. Even if you hear jerks, I mean, you hear bad stories about Edward Norton all the time. And
well, I assume most indie film directors are assholes.
Well,
but maybe that's just my perspective as a key grip and gaffer, because usually they're condescending and not able to set up a C-stand. So I don't understand why they're qualified to be in the same workplace as me.
He's a smart guy. I give him that. But I mean, like, he's not always the smartest person in the room, and he treats everyone like he is. And I don't want to get too far into it. But so neither of us have seen it, George. And I don't mean to piss on your parade. I just wanted to explain why I actively avoided that film.
Okay. Never heard anything about him. I have no experience with him whatsoever. So this is all news to me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And certainly the critics love him, which is frustrating every time. Alex, you're number 5.
My number 5 is a 2016 film I also saw at the Los Feliz 3 Theater that you don't like to go to, called Kubo and the Two Strings. Director Travis Knight helmed this star-studded film that combined invented techniques of digital and practical animation with puppetry and animatronics to create a visual family epic with tons of heart, comedy, and highly compelling action. The line between the puppets and animatronic elements and the animated elements is seamless, as this film creates a feeling of origami come to life, telling the story of a young boy turned warrior on a quest to discover his own identity and save the world from villains. I remain blown away by the innovation and visual storytelling that this team pulled off together.
So, Alex, you clearly did not watch the show before being on it. In our top 10 of 2016, I had Kubo and the Two Strings in at number 3. I considered it for a top 25 spot. It didn't make the top 25, but it was so close. It's easily top 30 of the decade for me. I loved this film. It's the spirituality of the film that struck me the most. It blended that with exciting adventure for teens and humor for the young ones. It makes it a near perfect animated film. That and the Box Trolls makes Laika one of my favorite animation companies. It's one of the deepest animated films I've ever seen, and important in how, in spite of that, it always remains entertaining. I can't believe it didn't win the Oscar for animated film that year. That and The Box Trolls are the two best animated films of the decade, and Kubo and the Two Strings blew my mind. It's a great pick. I couldn't squeeze it on, so I'm very excited that you were able to.
I loved it. I saw it twice in the theater. Can't recommend it enough for whatever age you are or wherever in the world you're from. Yeah, I think everyone will enjoy this film.
Loved it very, very much. George, have you seen Kubo and the Two Strings?
No, I have not.
It's amazing how much we missed. You know, like, I mean, too. Like, I missed a lot of your guys' list, and you've missed some of ours. So it's
you
really,
both make it sound wonderful. So
it really surprised me. I mean, like, I enjoyed Box Trolls a lot, so I wanted to see it, and but this took it to a new level because it's like Silence in some ways. Sorry, Alex. It's about spirituality, not necessarily about religion, but about spirituality, and I find particularly compelling, especially in an animated film. All right, guys, you guys ready to move on to my number 5?
Palpable anticipation.
And George likes that phrase. My number 5 was a film that we discussed as an indie spotlight way back in episode 4, back in the early year. And I believe for years we wondered if it would be the best indie we ever do in the show. My second and final foreign film on my top 10 of the decade was a nominee for the Foreign Film Oscar in 2013, losing to The Great Beauty, another film we did a review of in episode 53.2. The film I'm referring to is the Danish film The Hunt, starring the incomparable Mads Mikkelsen. In the film, Mads plays an elementary school teacher who is falsely accused of touching one of his young female students. Without the benefit of trial or investigation, he immediately becomes the pariah of the small Danish town, losing his job, reputation, and possibly custody of his teenage son. This was a film made before the Me Too era, but it boldly warns about the flip side of the coin, the damage that can be done if we're wrong, the danger of the mob mentality. Obviously, not all those accused are as innocent as Mads' character is, but the exquisitely made film suggests that we need to protect even them from unconstitutional concepts like Megan's Law here in the U.S. The performances in this important film are spot on all the way. Director Thomas Vinterberg uses a very restrained approach to let us come to our own conclusions on this very complex set of issues. Like Captain Phillips, the film's outstanding screenplay shows us both sides of the issue. The pain of being falsely accused, but also the understandable horror and rage of the parents of the alleged victim. In that sense, it feels like a very thorough examination of our still very real modern approach to guilt and vilification by suspicion. In that sense, it might be one of the more important films of the decade and a testament to the times that we live in. So, Alex, you watch a lot of foreign films, I know, especially from Sweden, maybe Denmark as well. Have you seen The Hunt?
I have not seen The Hunt, but The Celebration, the Dogma 95 film that Thomas Vinterberg made, has a lot of prominent Danish actors in it. I really enjoyed that one and have seen a few of his other films, and I always enjoy Mads Mikkelsen. I think he's one of the best working actors out right now.
Any chance you've seen The Hunt, George?
No, sorry.
Don't have to apologize to me.
I'm sorry I haven't seen it. I'm not sorry for you.
Can you apologize to me?
Sorry, Alex.
How dare you not see a film that I haven't seen?
It's time to move on to number 4, our number 4 film of the decade. Very exciting, moving right along. So let's see who gets to go first here. Number 4, it looks like it's going to be Alex. What is your number 4 film of the decade?
My number 4 film of the decade is a 2015 Spike Lee joint called Chirac. It's an adaptation of the ancient Greek classic play Lysistrata by the Athenian playwright Aristophanes. It's a story of women in the south side of Chicago fighting back against a gang war with a sex strike against the murderous men in their lives. The whole film is written and performed in lyrical verse with the vibrant musical style Lee has become famous for. Teyana Paris plays the lead as Lysistrata, giving a powerhouse performance ripe with humor, sensuality, and no-nonsense fury. It brings, I feel like, the comedy and the mood of what seeing a play in ancient Athens from what I've read in terms of primary sources would feel like, but in a cinematic form. The film is a poignant and powerful statement on gun violence, community, and gender and ethnic roles.
So now I get my revenge for Silence because I hated Chirac so much. George's number 1 film from 2018, when we did our top 10, was Black Klansman, which is less offensive to me than Chirac in terms of how over the top everything was. And I agree with all the things that you talked about that it was trying to be and it wanted to be about. It tried to be about those things, but nothing landed to me because it was so style over substance. And I liked the concept of adapting the Greek play. I liked the play Lysistrata. Everything was so overwrought. John Cusack's speech is so overwritten. Just from the very beginning of the movie, when he does his Spike Lee-esque over-the-top way to get your attention. Like, I was done with this movie from the moment it started. This just was super annoying to me from a stylistic point of view. Our first major disagreement, at least on your list. George, Chirac.
I haven't seen the movie.
I'd be curious because how much you like BlacKkKlansman. Because BlacKkKlansman, I feel like my main issue with BlacKkKlansman was the style over substance elements, but it's far less severe in Chirac.
I can understand saying that about Spike based on many of the movies of his that I've seen.
Okay, I think it's time for George. It is. George, you're number 4.
My number 4, I think, won an Oscar for Best Foreign Film. It is Son of Saul, directed by Laszlo Nemes. It's a Hungarian film. It is about members of the Sadr Commando at Auschwitz. These are the people who basically clear out the gassed bodies and incinerate them. Main story surrounds the lead character's attachment to a young boy who he does partake in the killing of, but does not want to give him this mass burial and wants to give him a proper Jewish burial. That in and of itself is enough to make this a very gripping film, but the style of the film is what really stands out to me. Almost everything around the lead character appears very blurry. You're looking at people who know that if they make one false move, they could be shot. And they all feel, he in particular feels very cornered, eyes front. And this is how the movie looks. Talking to people, not really seeing. It's as though the protagonist might have needed glasses, which the Nazis didn't allow him to have, so he can only see so far around him. And the entire feel of this film, of having that little control, was unnerving. I can understand someone not wanting to experience this movie, but I have to say I thought it was a very powerful film, very disturbing.
It did win the foreign film in 2015. I don't hate the film, but I did not enjoy it. I like the idea of it. Like, we stay in his perspective. We follow that character in close-up for a really long time, which eventually felt a little gimmicky to me, but it was interesting. I think mainly I found it a little maudlin and heavy-handed plot-wise. It's not like Chirac. I don't have that degree of animosity towards it. It didn't really land with me in any significant way. Alex, I don't suppose you've seen Son of Saul?
I have not.
Time for my number 4, which I think is a film that it's possible everybody's seen. Going all the way back to 2010 for my number 4. It was actually my number 3 film of that year when I first released the top 10. It was before this show, obviously. But having rewatched it twice since then, it continues to impress and is now my favorite film of 2010. Friend of the show, pop star Shanti Leone, for those that remember her, has named this film as her favorite film of the decade. Somewhere in between the bleak realism of The Wrestler and the experimental esoteric surrealism of Mother lies Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan, the other Best Picture nominee I have on my top 10. It's a thoroughly detailed and cinematic film that is, to me, very much about the creative process, particularly for actors and the toll that their craft can take on their mental health. The insecurities that come along with that life can dominate their lives. Many of us push ourselves to the limit in the arts, and at what price? What is it worth? Glory? Just a small piece of self-satisfaction, and maybe that's enough? I don't know. Maybe the elusive specter of fame that some equate with immortality? Aronofsky explores this theme with such richness. He uses each frame to its fullest with a Circean use of reflections to enhance his exploration of duality of both Nina and the two swans. Like Fight Club 11 years earlier, you get more from this film with each subsequent viewing. Natalie Portman, in an Oscar-winning performance, is exquisite as Nina. Her journey is massive. Her neuroses are heartbreakingly real. Her weaknesses startlingly honest and frustrating. Like Silence, there's so much going on in this very layered film, but this one ranks higher because it's also entertaining and emotional for me in a very compelling way. I heard an audible reaction. I wasn't sure how to interpret it. Who was it? Black Swan's my number 4, guys. Who made the audible reaction?
It's probably me. This is probably one of the films that I loathe the most.
Okay, so we're back in that Silence Chirac territory. We're off each other's paths here.
Yeah.
The last few picks. Do you want to say why?
Well, first off, the character actress that plays Natalie Portman's mother is just bumps for me and is absolutely terrible in this film.
Hershey.
I think this script is awful. I thought everything was ham-fisted in it. It had the typical thing on the collaborations between Matty Lebatique and Aronofsky where half the film is the back of a character's head following them around as if that's creative or putting you in their world when it's just lazy and crappy filmmaking, in my opinion.
The from behind thing is very evocative when done in moderation. It was not done in moderation in The Wrestler, but I do think it's done in moderation here. I think a lot of the filmmaking choices are spot on. And I guess the other thing you mentioned was the script, and I think the script is brilliant. I think the script is really detailed and rich and thematic. I liked it very, very much. So, George, you're going to have to be the tiebreaker on this one.
I would never rank it as highly as you did, but I would never say I loathed it. I liked the movie. I had no problem with Barbara Hershey other than she's one of these people who's had too much plastic surgery, and I don't think it's helped her very much.
I work with Barbara Hershey, too, and she is the most difficult actor I've ever worked with.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
That doesn't surprise me.
Massive disagreement on Black Swan.
It's one of the only times I've ever walked out of a theater and thought, not only do I want my money for my ticket back and 2 hours of my life, I'd like $1,000 in damages for having to sit through it. It's just terrible.
There'd be less people that hated it as much as you did. I mean, it was the Best Picture nominee.
Oh, I know a bunch of other people who loved it and thought it was brilliant, and it just made me lose respect for all of them. Hopefully you earn it back with 3, 2, and 1.
Respect for me, too.
A little bit, yeah.
Oh, wow. I didn't lose respect for you for Chirac. I just disagree with you. But
that's because Chirac's a better movie than Black Swan.
Oh, my God. I didn't realize.
Shots fired.
I didn't realize we're playing such high stakes poker. Okay, our top 3 films of the decade are coming up now, and I am not going to earn your respect back, I don't think. Moving on to number 3, George, I believe you get to go first with your number 3 film of the decade.
Okay. This is an Oscar winner, albeit one that won at the very last minute. Moonlight, directed by Barry Jenkins, written by Terrell Alvin McCraney. I thought this was just a very beautiful, very poetic, very haunting, very imaginative look at the complexities of growing up unloved and trying to build yourself up without that foundation. Casting the lead character with 3 completely different people made this experience a very universal one. There were moments of just sheer beauty in the film, visual beauty. The performances by most people were very good. Unfortunately, the older Kevin, I did not think was as good as the people that came before him. Thought it was a great study of a culture and a character. Just a very unique and beautiful experience. I was very happy that it was as successful as it was.
I thought Moonlight would come up tonight, and I know it would come up from you because Alex and I frequently make fun of Moonlight, particularly.
I understand that. It risked artsiness.
We make fun of the cinematography quite a bit because it was nominated, and we actually both feel that it was actually sloppy cinematography that people mistook for artfulness. I don't hate it that much. I wouldn't say it's a bad movie. It certainly didn't connect with me as much as it did everyone else. I do think it's highly overrated. If I had to pick, for me, the most overrated film of the decade, it would probably be Moonlight. Alex, you and I joke about it all the time, but
I'll say I thought the performances were brilliant and I loved the script, but I think this film is a technical failure. I just hated the cinematography in this, but that's more to blame the challenges of an indie budget and an indie schedule.
Great indies that managed to have great cinematography.
You had a very amateur young team of people doing the cinematography on this that didn't have a clear communication on it and a director who didn't respect what goes into the technical aspects of filmmaking.
Or producers that didn't respect the technical craft.
That's actually more likely.
I will say something controversial, though, performance-wise, but I actually thought Naomi Harris was terrible. Really pushing. Like, I didn't believe her addiction at all.
Is that the mom?
Yeah.
I just totally forgot about her.
It just seemed like this sort of hackneyed go-to spot for addiction, and I didn't believe it. Like, there's a movie from the previous decade called Down to the Bone with Vera Farmiga as an addicted person. That, to me, should be like the baseline of what addiction should be. I didn't buy her. It didn't feel specific enough from an acting point of view to me. And George, I guess you would know better, but it read to me as patently false.
Like I said, she wasn't like the big standout memorable performance to me, so I don't have a strong opinion on how she did.
I love Mahershala Ali always. I was a big proponent of him in 2018. I felt like the role was too small to win an Oscar. I actually didn't think, I thought it was a good performance, but it didn't feel like enough screen time to really warrant an Oscar when there were some other performances from that year. George, do you have a rebuttal for all that we said?
No.
Okay. Good. And then we can move right on. Did we do Alex's number 3 yet? We did not. Alex, your number 3.
My number 3 is a 2019 film called Honey Boy. It's Shia LaBeouf wrote this. It's a semi-autobiographical film about his challenging relationship with his rodeo clown father and his journey to conquer his own PTSD. I think the film is brilliantly directed by Alma Harrell, fellow redhead filmmaker, bringing a unique female voice to a male-driven story. I thought it was a heartfelt story about what it is to be a man beyond the definitions of family or society putting on you. I'm a person who lives with PTSD, and I think this film captured a lot of its challenges in a transparent and sympathetic way. It also tells a Hollywood working class story not focused on celebrity or wealth, which is incredibly refreshing when so many self-reflexive films of the American film scene get really caught up in trope-ridden spectacle. Honey Boy is an intimate, character-driven story that I think remains profoundly human.
Because it was your number one film of 2019 and my number 6 film of 2019. I'm certainly in agreement in being a great film. I think it's a beautiful and painful tribute to the difficulties of parenthood, even if it is mostly from the perspective of the son. You know, as George may recall on his show, the Oscar Preview, I named Shia LaBeouf as the best supporting actor of 2019.
I've named 3 of his performances in my list so far today.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of his. He continues to deliver these amazing performances. I thought the scene work in the film was outstanding. It's a terrific film in spite of Lucas Hedges being in it. It was number 6 this year, so it didn't really get into the conversation for the top 25 this year, but maybe a top 100 slot of the decade. I don't think you saw it. Did you, George?
No, and you actually can see it. It's on Amazon. I don't know why. I guess I've gotten caught up in watching Hunters. That's my Amazon time right now.
So my number 3, I got a lot of heat for this film when I named it the number 1 film of 2017. In rewatching some of the films from that year for this project, I thought for sure that this would probably be one of the ones that didn't hold up, and maybe that theatrical experience that George talked about earlier maybe had me swept away the first time I saw it. But I was wrong. This film is even better. So in spite of all the rage from those of you out there who probably didn't see the film, I'm doubling down on a Jackie Chan movie. I've got Martin Campbell's The Foreigner as number 3. Devin came over to watch it last week at 11 p.m. one night. I didn't tell him what we were going to watch. I just popped it in. And he didn't expect much because he was on that top 10 in 2017 and he hadn't seen it. He had minor quibbles, though. He was very surprised and impressed with it. And he said if he had seen it in time, it would have made his top 10 of 2017 as well. We talked about it for like an hour. That's how meaningful this film turned out to be. And I give a lot of credit to Campbell, Chan, and the screenwriters for taking what could have been just another action thriller and turning into a powerful meditation on the current geopolitical landscape, while not sacrificing, and this is important, while not sacrificing the action that we enjoy in Jackie Chan films. The Foreigner in the title doesn't just refer to Jackie Chan, it's also about other characters, including Pierce Brosnan in the performance of his career. As a former IRA leader, now a British government official tasked with keeping the peace in Ireland, he's torn between the concept of peace and his loyalty to his countrymen. He is left as a man without a country, which calls into question the very concept of nationalism, which seems to define so many ideas and ideals for some people around the world, while others feel that cooperation between nations and the disappearing of borders might lead to a happier, more peaceful future. In addition to having a lot of depth, the film is also super exciting. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of a film Alex and I watched for the Oscar Movie Marathon this year, Costa Gavras' Z from 1969, in the way that it peels away at the layers of an investigation into a conspiracy and an act of terrorism, just without the satirical elements that were a part of Z. The editing of The Foreigner is crackling, balancing lots of different plot threads while also maintaining the excitement. The plot is intricate, and Martin Campbell tells the story in a clear, palatable fashion. This is an important film with emotional power, entertaining, evocative, and informational. And after all, what more could you ask for from a film? And people complain about it that I named it in 2017. And I watched it again, and I'm sticking with it. I think it's really strong, and people need to watch it, even though it's a Jackie Chan film. I don't suppose anybody is bothered with The Foreigner.
I haven't seen it yet, but I think Jackie Chan is one of the most brilliant performers of the last century.
And to be honest, even though it's marketed as a Jackie Chan film, it's really Pierce Brosnan's movie. It's Pierce Brosnan's journey. I mean, Jackie Chan plays a big role in it and is a bit of a tormentor to Pierce Brosnan in a way. George, there's no way you've seen The Foreigner.
I haven't. You make it sound great, though.
So, it sounds like exactly the kind of movie I'd love.
Extra points for combining entertainment value and depth. I mean, that is, to me, the goal. All right, you guys ready?
Yes.
Number 2, the top 2 films of the 2010s. Really, really exciting, guys. All right, who goes first? It looks like it's going to be Mr. Alex Evans, your number 2 film of the decade, sir.
The 2017 film, The Shape of Water. Guillermo del Toro's magnum opus is the gothic romantic storyteller he has become known for being. The film is set in 1950s Baltimore at the height of the Cold War. It shows a world in which the poor and nature are both silenced as the arrogance of industry, nationalism, and brutalist masculinity, and how true love can transcend even the vilest of villains. Legacy Effects created one of the most visually spectacular Gilman creatures in cinema to date. It's a crowning achievement to a century of on-screen makeup artists. A Best Picture winner in its year, this film is a juggernaut of cinema that reminds us that us as artists are capable of holding ourselves to high standards and pushing the limits of what a film is capable of being.
That is second Best Picture winner I think has come up on the list tonight, Moonlight in that of the decade. So I didn't hate Shape of Water, but it didn't make my top 10. It made Devin's, I think. It felt like it was trying to connect with me on an emotional level, and it just didn't. I felt a little bit of the manipulation and contrivance. I think that's the best way to put it. Like, I was very aware of the director manipulating me. And if you look back at the list, I think I mentioned a couple times the films that I appreciated not feeling manipulative. And I felt like The Shape of Water was. Not that it was a waste of my time. I didn't want my money back. I didn't hate it like Chirac or anything like that. I'm middle of the road on it. Might not even make my top 20 of that particular year. So I didn't really consider it for tonight. I'm also a little befuddled why people were as touched by it. I like the idea of it, but it felt a little like well-tread territory to some degree, even if like the details were a little different. George, Shape of Water.
I liked the movie, but I did find it to be overrated. I felt that there were times where it just was excessive. I wish I could remember more specifically. Wasn't there a musical interlude at one point?
One of my favorite scenes.
Yeah. I mean, I get that. It had made its point with me and kept going on. That said, it does have some very good performances. It is very imaginative. It has some very striking moments. I liked the movie. I was just surprised by how popular it turned out to be. It wasn't one of my favorites.
Sounds like that's similar to where I'm at with it.
I'll just say having two leads that don't speak at all, essentially giving silent film performances in an otherwise color talkie, I found really cool literal fish out of water story. Knowing that Del Toro spent a ton of his own money and time developing the concept art, just the attention to detail and innovation in how they created that creature and made it interactive even on set as it was being filmed, just masterful merging of practical and visual effects.
All right, cool. So we're going to move on now to George's numero dos.
There's a link between our choices, Alex. Like I said, it's hard to leave certain movies off, but all the same, I'm going to go with this one because it touched me so deeply. And it stars Sally Hawkins and Ethan Hawke. It's Maudie, directed by, I think it's Ailing Walsh, an extremely small, touching story about a Canadian woman whose infirmed physical condition, she's arthritic, leads everyone to think she's mentally infirmed, and she's treated as such. It was all done very powerfully, effectively, hauntingly. I loved the film. I thought it was just a little gem. I wish more people had gone to see it. But anyone I know who did see it, prior to now, I don't know what's about to follow, liked it as much as I did.
Wasting himself.
Yeah, it was one of the special gems of the past decade for me, so I'm happy to put it on this list.
I've heard you talk about it before, but I'm glad you don't remember. I haven't seen it, and I still haven't seen it. So you're spared, at least from me, any vitriol. They were eligible for Oscars the same year, Shape of Water and Maudie, I believe. It was also 2017 for Oscars, because I remember they were just saying what film is she going to be nominated for, Shape of Water or Maudie. So as much as I like Ethan Hawke, and that's the second time he's come up too on your list. Ethan Hawke and Shia LaBeouf and Andrew Garfield are running the day. Alex, have you seen Maudie?
I haven't, but I've really enjoyed every Sally Hawkins performance I've ever seen. So
she's great, Maudie.
Wow.
I mean, I've only seen like 3, so. And 2 of them are Paddington and Paddington 2.
She can Paddington 2.
They're charming films.
I'm sure. She can do no wrong. All right, you guys ready to move on? All right, it's time for my number 2. So I'm excited about this. Now, I hinted earlier that one director had 2 films on my top 10 list of the decade, and it's time for me to reveal that director and that other film now. This film is an indie that we discussed in episode 23.2, and I named it as the best indie we discussed that year in episode 39.4 when Davey, J Money, and I counted down the top indies that we reviewed. J Money named it number 3, incidentally. And so the film is from 2011, Shame by Steve McQueen. So he directed the Best Picture winner in 2013, 12 Years a Slave, but it's his other 2 films of the decade that I found to be masterpieces. This film in particular, Shame, which sees him as a filmmaker, seem to have grown in his artistry. In his first film from 2008 called Hunger, he similarly had very long takes that came off as indulgent and at times boring. In Shame, he still has long takes, but he knows when to cut them off now. and he doesn't do it as incessantly throughout the movie, only when the script or story seems to call for it. His style served the story instead of the other way around. The performances by Michael Fassbender and Carey Mulligan are the best of their respective careers and among the best of the decade, and that's saying a lot because both of them are really strong talents. The film also digs deep on sexuality and its role in our modern culture and also on addiction. Fassbender's need for sex in the film could have easily been replaced by drugs or gambling or some other supposed vice. Shame explores the lengths we go to in order to fill the holes that we feel, to feel alive, when so much of our existence can make us feel numb inside. It's a perfect blend of style and substance and depth and meaning. Truly a masterpiece from a master artist. So guys, I've got Shame and I've got Steve McQueen here on my list twice. Has anybody seen Shame?
I have. I thoroughly enjoyed the film. I think the most daring performance I've seen from Fassbender.
That's for sure. I mean, I love a lot of his other performances. Prometheus, the year before that, in a supporting role was pretty outstanding, but Shame is just like an exquisite performance. You've seen Shame as well, it sounds like, George.
Yeah, I agree about his performance. The movie, it didn't have much of an impact on me at all. I felt like it was trying very hard to. Carey was very good as well. I just didn't know why I was watching that. I'd probably heard so much about it beforehand that my expectations were up very high, and it didn't live up to that.
It's interesting. It's a factor, certainly, but it really moved me. And I don't want to say I can identify with that character. That sounds a little weird, but I mean, I can certainly identify in needing to, in feeling numb and trying to fill holes. That actually sounds bad as well, given the context. I should probably stop talking, but I found it very touching and interesting and
sad. And
it's bleak and sad, but I also found a lot of hope in it too, to some degree, to feel that a lot of people feel the way that we feel sometimes. I thought it was very honest and again, not manipulative in any way. And that's one of the things I like when he does choose to not cut and just hold on long takes. It's bold and it also feels a little more natural and real and organic to me. That's my rebuttal. Guys, give me the drum roll. It's time. That's not a drum roll. Come on, there. Film of the decade. Each of our number one films of the decade. And I mentioned earlier, I doubted that there was going to be any crossover amongst the three of us, and there has not yet been. My little tease is there will be. I can tell you there will be crossover with one of these gentlemen. Number one film of the decade, and I've got that. And these films that I have here have not come up yet. I've tried to guess them, and they have not come up. George, you will go first with your number one film of the decade, and we'll see if I got it right.
Okay, now I'm clarifying again. It isn't technically my number one film of the decade. It does turn out that my pick from last year is the one that did go on to win the Oscar. I didn't see that coming when I saw the movie. In fact, I liked it very much and thought it's a shame a movie like this won't win the Oscar. And then it did actually become more and more popular. And by the end, I thought it was going to happen, and it did.
Name the movie.
Parasite.
So here I can reveal now.
You did say it. You're right. My God, I thought it was a great movie. Grabbed me right from the start. It was visually striking. It didn't give you heroes. Most people I know see it and talk about it as though it tells the truth of our divide between the rich and the poor, and they're all awful to each other. And it gives you reasons to laugh about in that. I will just say that I thought it was a very imaginative bit of storytelling with great sets. I thought very strong performances, a very biting sense of humor that grew less and less funny as it went along and became genuinely harrowing and says a lot about the world we are living in now. I didn't find that contrived. I'm saying this because I know that JB did say this when we talked about the movies of last year. But it grabbed me early on. And again, when I saw it, my expectations weren't of this highly praised award juggernaut kind of film. It really caught me off guard. And that said, I have watched it since, and I still find it a very compelling, very disturbing, very striking film.
So you've already rebutted all my arguments.
I'm very defensive.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't. You haven't convinced me, no, but I mean, like, you've addressed.
That's okay.
You've addressed all of my issues that I have with the film, and they're plentiful. And, and Devin, George, and I got into a large argument about, not large, but several arguments about it on the Oscar preview. So I don't need to rehash that particular situation, but I'll try and summarize and say, like, the things that bothered me were the contrivance, huge. That was the biggest thing for me. The performances I did think were weak. You said you disagree on both those counts. I feel like it was reverse engineered. I feel like they had the thing that they wanted to say about the class divide and then worked their way backwards. And some sloppy writing, and Devin made this really good point about the metaphorical rock and things like that. Things were a little too wink, wink, nudge, nudge for me to really feel anything. That's why I use the phrase reverse engineered, because I feel like they had their point and then sort of manipulated events in a not as organic way. And I know Alex hasn't seen it.
I enjoyed Snowpiercer and Okja a lot, so I'm looking forward to seeing the film.
And I hated both those films even more. I like Parasite better than those two. And so that shows you how much I hated Snowpiercer and Okja. I hated them a lot. Alex, your number one film of the decade.
It's a 2015 film that is an adaptation of Macbeth, starring Michael Fassbender and Marion Cotillard, in this stark, surrealist adaptation of the infamous Scottish play.
More Fassbender.
Yes. The design and storytelling root themselves in historical context of the real King Macbeth of the 10th century in Scotland during military incursions with invading Norway. Shakespeare walked the line between artist and propagandist with his text, and most screen and stage adaptations set this book within a world akin to 1500s England rather than the real context of the source material. This film captures the culture and feel of the 10th century, adding in nonverbal narrative devices with slow-motion stylized battle sequences cut with monologues, including reference to Macbeth's children dying in battle and of sickness being the motive of their madness. A fact Shakespeare's audience would have been familiar with, but something typically left out for modern audiences not familiar with early medieval history. The intensity and chemistry between Fassbender and Cotillard is electric and makes you sympathetic to their madness that ensues from his battle fatigue and PTSD, coupled with the shared trauma any parent would feel burying their own children. This is a tale of sound and fury told by Justin Kurzel, who does a masterful job. You will leave this film with scorpions on your mind.
Okay. Things to unpack there. First, every year in the show, either in the top 10 or a sound off, we reveal what each of our worst films of the year were. But for 2016, my worst film of the year was from Justin Kurzel and Michael Fassbender. Assassin's Creed was my worst film of the year from the same duo.
They were packaged in development, and Assassin's Creed was made so he could get the financing to make this.
Absolutely, I understand that. I'm just saying, I think it's funny that one of the worst films of the year is that it had the same duo. I've not seen Macbeth, and I also just need to take care of this last little order of business here. So I obviously didn't get it right, but I did pick a film from 2015 that I thought you might choose. I thought you might go with this Best Picture winner, as a recent history kind of event.
I found that film kind of forgettable.
Okay, well there you go. I got you wrong, but I got George quasi right. I like Spotlight, but that's beside the point. I've not seen Macbeth, so that leaves it to George. Have you seen Macbeth?
No, I did not, and I'm surprised I haven't. I love the play. I love the two of them, but I had heard. I've got to be honest, I heard some very bad things about it, so I stayed away from it. I've seen so many different interpretations of Shakespearean pieces. However, your enthusiasm for it makes me want to see it more.
Most people that are into Shakespeare explore Shakespeare from an Anglo-Saxon perspective, and this film is from a Scottish perspective. If you haven't considered the show in that way, it's going to be a bit jarring.
At this point, there's no reason not to see a jarring interpretation of a piece that you know very well.
Unless you're afraid of scorpions, apparently. All right, guys. I think it's time. It's time for a number one, yeah?
Do you have a guess at what it is, George?
No idea.
Yeah, I don't either.
It's not Jumanji.
It could be, but I already revealed that it came up.
Paddington?
It came up already tonight on one of your top 10. My number one is a film that. So we've what turns out to be the only crossover happens to be my number one film of the decade, and it was one of the ones I rewatched in the past month or so. So I thought it might do well on this list before starting to rewatch stuff. But upon rewatching it, it hit every beat I remembered it did and then some. Fans of the show might remember in the very first episode that we did on February 20th, 2015, I named this as my number one film of 2014 and the one that should have been nominated for Best Picture. Alex, I'm referring to David Ayer's World War II tank film Fury as my number one film of the decade, which you had at number 8. And here's why I think Fury is a perfect movie. David Ayer puts us inside the tank and shakes us with every bullet, wounds us with every death, and thrills us with every victory. In spite of its episodic nature, it's kind of classically structured. We follow Logan Lerman's character Norman as he goes from a man with a conscience to seeing his soul die to possible redemption when he's offered mercy. All of this is done without any overt use of sentimentality or heavy-handedness. It all lands naturally and organically. Norman's tank mates have already lost their souls at this point, and every once in a while when their old humanity seeps out, they force themselves to swallow it in order to keep going. Those moments are beautiful to behold. In that way, it's a movie that seems to bridge the gap between hawks and doves, though each group will see what they want to see in the film. The film honors veterans, warriors, heroes, but also shows the toll that wars take on the hearts and minds of men. Ayer manages to make a film that is simultaneously exciting and thoughtful. Directorially, I think it's a masterpiece. He keeps the action moving, makes you aware of the geography, the workings of the tank, and strategy without ever losing sight of the character work. It's the best ensemble of any film of the decade, in my opinion. And once again, with our friend Shia LaBeouf, I named him as a supporting actor candidate in that particular year. And it also features the single best scene of the decade, referring to a long scene inside a German apartment that occurs midway through the film. A lovely moment of breath and reflection and love in between all the fighting and killing and dying. Fury is everything I hope a film to be. And we've already talked about it. I've got Fury as my number one film of the decade. After rewatching it, there was no question for me.
Yeah, it's a good movie.
Any rebuttal or anything you guys disagree with what I said or want to add on to? Or, I mean, we've talked about it with Alex a little bit.
I can only imagine what service people in these combat positions, the toll that it's taken on them to see just even the shorter period of World War II and this tank campaign.
All right, so those are our favorite films of the decade, guys. It's we got through. It's hard to imagine now. So it's very, very exciting. I complain about making top tens from year to year for the lack of great films, but looking at them from the point of view of a whole decade, 3,500 films to choose from. There are films that I liked that might not even make a top 100. That this was the hardest list I've ever had to make, and a great pleasure to revisit some of this work that I consider to be great art. Do you guys have it going through this list and going through some of the films of the decade? Do you guys have any? How do you feel about how tonight went? How making the list went, that process? What do you think?
Well, I enjoyed hearing everyone else's choices, and I think we all agree that there was a lot to pick from, which it's great to acknowledge all of it, to not forget a movie because it's a different year.
So, Alex, any sort of thoughts about this process and the decade in general?
I was interested, like I said, this decade spans my the first 10 years of my filmmaking career and all the places life has taken me in that time. So it was interesting going back and reviewing. I spent a few weeks working on this list, and a lot of things went on and off of it before I arrived at what I presented here on the show. Just left me with a profound appreciation for all the great pieces that have been made over the last decade.
And all the artists that were involved with those great pieces.
Yeah.
Also, too, and this just occurred to me, that we started the show in 2015, and doing the show and focusing on the details of the filmmaking as we do on the show, I think it also alters the way I look at some of these films. So when I rewatch some of these older ones from the front half of the decade, I thought differently about it. So this show itself, I think, is a factor on how I'm looking at these films. So quick totals, guys. As you were going along, I thought I was curious about which years are going to be most represented. And if I got the tally right, it looks like 2015 is the winner with 5 films that were represented, but not any of the big ones like The Revenant and Spotlight and The Big Short were the big 3 films at the Oscars that year.
Well, I thought all 3 of those are horribly overrated.
I liked The Big Short a lot, and I rewatched it for this, and it wound up at 16 of the decade. None of my films on my list were from 2015. You two guys made up the 5 films from 2015 to be the number one year represented in our composite top 10 there. For my list, 2012 is the most represented list of my top 25. It has 5 films in my top 25, but none of them cracked the top 10. So I think that was really interesting.
I always appreciate hearing the nuanced feedback on what different kinds of films each of us connect with. And it's a great way in getting to know other people.
And now sort of a sadder moment, if you will. George has been with us for the last 3 years now, I think. And he's been part of some of our biggest performing episodes, the review of Lolita, the review of The Spectacular Now, The Girlfriend Experience is our biggest show that we did last year. Actually, Alex as well was on that. And of course, one of the probably the best show we ever did, the 1942 in Review, our coup de grace, but he's leaving us now. So George, I wanted to say, if you wanted to say something, farewell to the audience or what have you, we appreciate all the time you put in.
Oh, it's been fun. I love talking about movies. It's just time consuming. But I will say that I liked all of the specials I was on. And for me, the 1942 one was a real highlight too. It was just really a gas to go back to a different year and, uh, not look back on anything with a judgmental attitude. We just see things differently now. And 100 years from now, 1942 might look preferable to 2009, 2020. Who knows?
Now 1942 looks preferable, at least the movies anyway.
Yeah, yeah. That was a great year. We had so many great things to talk about and so many great stars that we got to see, and directors and writers that we got to see work by who not their biggest hits, because back then people were working so much more.
It was like a factory.
Yeah.
I think it's a similar experience with 1988.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that we as filmmakers, performers, and technicians, like, this is a manufacturing industry. Like, we manufacture experiences that we bring to people on stage or in the theater. This show is always a great celebration of what our community has accomplished through the years.
Awesome. Well, George, thank you very much for your time and service. You will be missed. You were a great addition to the society and the team. We will be back with some new members of the society and starting our 6th season with our 60th series of episodes. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.